1,000 euros. Just let that number sink in for a second. Back in October 2008, the share price of Volkswagen absolutely exploded to over 1,000 euros in a span of just 2 days. It was a massive quintupling of its price that literally caught the entire global market completely by surprise.
And it leaves us with this truly fascinating question. How did a legacy car maker, seemingly out of nowhere, briefly become the absolute most valuable company in the entire world? I mean, what invisible forces could possibly drive a stock price up that fast and that violently?
Well, welcome to this explainer on the mechanics of the squeeze. My goal today is to take these incredibly complex financial phenomena and completely demystify them for you. We're going to perform a kind of autopsy on the market mechanics that cause these massive financial disruptions, and we're going to do it step by step using some really clear, beautiful visual analogies. Let's dive in.
Section 1. The Short Selling Trap.
So to really understand the squeeze, we have to establish the foundation of what a short seller is actually trying to do in the market. Taking a short position is fundamentally different from normal investing. Think of it like this brilliant analogy right here. Imagine borrowing a friend's car. That's step 1. Step 2, you immediately sell that borrowed car for cash. Step 3, you wait and you just hope that the market value of that exact model of car drops. Finally, step 4, you buy an identical car for much cheaper down the road, you return it to your friend, and you pocket the leftover cash.
And this analogy perfectly matches the formal definition of shorting in the financial markets. An investor borrows shares from a broker for a fee, immediately sells them at the current market price, and then they wait. If their analysis is right and the company loses value, they purchase those shares back at a lower price, return them to the lender, and keep the difference as pure profit. The whole strategy relies entirely on the idea that an asset is going down.
But here is the catch, and it is an absolutely crucial one. The risk is theoretically infinite. Think about it. When you buy a stock normally, like a long position, your maximum loss is just your initial investment, right? If the stock goes to zero, you lose what you put in. But with a short position, there is absolutely no limit to how high a stock's price can rise. You still have to buy those shares back to return them to your broker, regardless of the price.
Which brings us to a frankly terrifying scenario for traders. What happens when the price doesn't fall? What happens when a crowded room of short sellers all realize at the exact same moment that the exits are locked and the stock is actually rising?
Well, it builds into an explosive chain reaction. First, say positive news hits, maybe an earnings surprise or a sudden surge of retail buying, and it pushes the price of a heavily shorted stock up. Boom, the pressure cooker is sealed. Suddenly, short sellers face massive, rapidly escalating unrealized losses on their ledgers. To protect their own capital, lenders issue margin calls, demanding these short sellers deposit more cash immediately or forcefully close their positions. And how do you close a short position? You have to buy the stock. So all these short sellers are forced to buy shares at the exact same time, and this massive influx of buying volume pushes the price even higher, trapping more short sellers who are then also forced to buy. It's literally pouring fuel on a fire.
And this violent, escalating chain reaction of forced buying, this is the short squeeze. It's the exact mechanic we saw with AMC, where positive news hit a stock with a high short float, and traders betting against it had to desperately scramble to buy the stock back just to exit their positions, sending the price skyrocketing.
Section 2. Enter the gamma squeeze.
Now, there is another mechanism that is arguably even more explosive. Let's cleanly define this bit of financial jargon first. Gamma is an options metric, known as a Greek, that measures how quickly another metric, delta, changes as the underlying stock price moves. Okay, don't get bogged down in the math here. The most important thing to know is that a gamma squeeze is purely an options flow phenomenon. It has everything to do with how the dealers who sell options manage their own risk.
As our sources beautifully put it, when gamma is high, small price increases cause large jumps in delta, which in turn require large hedge adjustments, accelerating the feedback loop. What this means in plain English is that small, seemingly harmless price moves suddenly cause absolute chaos for the market makers who sold those options.
So here is how this second feedback loop, the gamma squeeze, actually works in practice. Step 1. Traders suddenly and heavily buy call options, which are just bets that the stock will go up. Step 2. Market makers, the dealers, sell these calls to the traders. But remember, market makers don't want to bet against the stock. They just want to collect their fees. So step 3, to hedge their risk, they must go out and buy the underlying stock. Step 4, all this massive institutional buying pushes the stock price up. And finally, step 5, because of that rising price and the high gamma, the dealers are forced to constantly readjust their hedge by buying even more stock. It is a rapid, self-reinforcing stock price surge triggered entirely by forced hedging.
Let's put these side by side to draw a stark, memorable distinction between the two phenomena. A short squeeze is caused by traders who are caught mispositioned and are forced to buy stock to cover massive losses. A gamma squeeze, on the other hand, is caused by market makers who are structurally forced to aggressively buy stock simply to hedge their options exposure. Two totally different triggers, but both result in explosive, unstoppable buying pressure.
Section 3. The ultimate feedback loop.
So what happens when you put both of these immense forces together? Well, you get this shocking number, greater than 100%. Back in early 2021, hedge funds and traders were betting so heavily against the video game retailer GameStop that more than 100% of the company's cash flow and available float was actively being shorted.
GameStop became the absolute perfect storm. I mean, it brought together every single ingredient we've just talked about. You had extremely high short interest, meaning thousands of short sellers were incredibly vulnerable. You had massive online coordination from retail investors on the Reddit forum Wall Street's Bets. And crucially, those retail investors weren't just buying normal shares, they were heavily engaged in aggressive call option buying.
The GameStop saga was historically monumental because it wasn't just one squeeze. It was the two loops compounding on top of each other. The relentless upward price momentum squeezed the short sellers, who had little choice but to desperately buy back shares. Simultaneously, the aggressive call option buying created a massive gamma squeeze, forcing market makers to violently buy shares to hedge those options. The forced buying of the shorts and the forced hedging of the dealers basically poured gasoline on each other, creating a terrifying feedback loop that sent the stock completely into the stratosphere.
And right at the center of this was Keith Gill, known online as Roaring Kitty. He reaped massive profits from the squeeze after spending months sharing his deep dive analysis of GameStop. But what's really interesting is his defense. When he was actually brought before Congress, he completely rejected the idea that he manipulated the market. He argued that his public conversations sharing his analysis were, quote, no different than what people do at bars, golf courses, or with family members at home. In his view, it was just a group of independent individuals who recognized an intensely vulnerable market position and decided to act on it.
Section 4. A history of squeezes. While GameStop and AMC obviously made headlines globally, these dramatic events are actually deeply woven into the history of the market. Take a look at this timeline. In 2008, a sudden demand for put options on Lehman Brothers stock created immense selling pressure. That's a classic option squeeze. That exact same year, as we saw at the very beginning of this explainer, Volkswagen experienced a legendary short squeeze that catapulted its price to €1,000, making it briefly the world's most valuable company. And then, of course, the 2021 retail-driven dual squeezes of GameStop and AMC. This history brilliantly illustrates that whenever massive mispositioning happens, whether by traders shorting more than a company is actually worth or options dealers getting caught completely off balance, the market eventually snaps back, and it snaps back violently.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. We now know the mechanics, we know the ingredients, and we definitely know that mispositioning is a human habit that never really disappears. So in a market that is increasingly driven by retail options flow and a very real danger of infinite risk, what exactly happens when the exit's locked next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep an eye on those market mechanics, and as always, stay curious.